Hey y'all, Kenny here with my Thompson Center Encore accuracy tip number 3. Thanks for joining me. Today I'm talking headspace as it relates to the Encore. It is one of the causes of the dreaded vertical stringing that you hear so much about with this rifle. I've already covered 2 other possible causes with tips 1 and 2, so if you haven't seen those videos, be sure to check them out. So what is headspace? Well, a very simplified definition would be that it is the length of a firearm's chamber from a point where the cartridge seats in that chamber to the bolt face, or in the case of the Encore, to this firing pin bushing. Now on a bottleneck cartridge like the 30-06, it would be from the shoulder to the bolt face. On a rimmed cartridge like the 44 Magnum, it would be from the inside of the rim to the bolt face. 2 things here: a cartridge that has negative headspace, that is one that is too long for the chamber, can cause accuracy issues in the Encore. A cartridge that has excessive positive headspace, and that is a cartridge that's too short for the chamber, can be dangerous, and I'll give you the Kenny D guarantee on those 2 statements. Let me stop and say here that anytime you handle, shoot, load ammunition for, or make modifications to a firearm, there are risks involved. You are the captain of your own ship. I try to give you accurate information based on my knowledge and experience, but you ultimately are the decider as to what is safe and unsafe. So if you choose to practice these things, you assume all the risk, not me. Read the disclaimer at the beginning of the video. So how much headspace is too much? Well, that depends on who you ask. I hear the number 6,000 kicked around a lot. And while that may be okay for a bolt action rifle, I think it's excessive for the Encore. So what's the difference? Well, a bolt action rifle has these lugs on the bolt that engages the lugs in the receiver, and that is a solid lockup. With the Encore, you have a single lug at the bottom of the barrel that engages the receiver. And when you fire a cartridge in this rifle, the barrel will flex forward. So you have your headspace plus the amount of flex of the barrel. So that brass is going to have to stretch that much in order to make contact with the firing pin bushing. Now brass is somewhat elastic, but it'll only stretch so much before you have trouble. This is a case head separation. That happens when brass has reached its limit. I did not hot rod this cartridge. That came about because I reloaded this case too many times. I was accustomed to a bolt action rifle and brass life, and I wasn't checking the cases as I should have been. It's really simple to do that, and if you reload for the Encore, that's something that you need to be aware of. I'm not going to get into details on that right now. I'm going to do an entire reloading segment, so if you're interested in that, now's a good time to subscribe so you'll get a notification. So how much headspace should you have in the Encore? Well, I say maximum headspace should be 3 thousandths. If 3 thousandths is the maximum headspace, then what is the minimum? Well, ideally that would be 0. But I caution you against playing to get it as close as you can gain. Brass varies. Sometimes when you load a bullet in a case, you'll lose some headspace. So I stay between 2 and 3 thousandths. If I'm a little tight at 2, that's 1 thousandths and a half, and everything's good. I get excellent accuracy and good brass life with that setup. So why does negative headspace, that is a cartridge that's too long for the chamber, cause accuracy issues with the Encore? Well, if you put a cartridge that's too long in this chamber and close the action, that cartridge will apply pressure to the barrel. You have your locking lugs, which are spring loaded. Now you can upgrade that spring to a heavier one, and some people say that helps. Mine are factory and they work just fine. But when you apply pressure to the barrel, these lugs are not going to engage the receiver as they would without that pressure. That can cause a problem. Some people say, well, just slam the action shut and that'll solve that. But Your barrel also sits in a saddle inside the receiver. This pressure will also keep that barrel from seating in that saddle as it should. That is what aligns the barrel with the receiver that will cause you some accuracy problems. So how are we going to measure headspace? Well, some people like to have the best there is in anything that they do. And if you're one of those people, and there's nothing wrong with that, Mike Bellm makes a nice little dial indicator that you can use to measure headspace. It's very accurate, and it is probably the best there is. It costs about 70 bucks. I prefer to just use a filler gauge and spend that 70 bucks on a good scope mount or a nice recoil pad to protect this old bony shoulder. Now, if you go to buy a set of feeler gauges, make sure you get a full set. On Amazon, they're like $7 at a parts store. Auto parts store, they'll probably cost you closer to 20 bucks. But a full set will begin at 1/1000. That's 0.0015. So make sure you get that. So before you actually measure your headspace, you need to first determine what your barrel to firing pin bushing gap is. You just take a feeler gauge and insert it between the barrel and the bushing and close the action. You select a gauge that has a slight amount of drag when you remove it, and that is your barrel to firing pin bushing clearance. Now, the reason you want to measure that is that you can never measure headspace that is greater than that dimension. So if you have 0.002 barrel to firing pin bushing clearance, you can't measure 3, 4, or even 0.005 headspace. You can only measure less than 0.002. In fact, you can't even measure 0.002 because you already have drag on your gauge. So that's why it's important to know what your barrel to firing pin bushing gap is. So what do you do if you don't have enough barrel to firing pin bushing gap? You're going to have to trim some off of the chamber end of this barrel. Now, I know that sounds scary, but it's really not. You can take it to a gunsmith or any machinist that has a milling machine and have them take 5, 10 thousandths, whatever off. You're not going to hurt the barrel at all. It's not nearly so critical as the crown end of the barrel. You can do this yourself with a flat file. The problem with using a flat file is it's hard to keep this level, and you'll kind of round the edges of the barrel off. May not look pretty, but it will work. Now, I made a little jig that I run in my drill to square this thing up. I hog the material off with a file, and then I true it up, and it looks pretty professional, I think, when I get finished. I'm not going to go into detail on how I do that in this video, but I will do that in the next video. So another reason for you to subscribe. One other thing I want to show you is this receiver that I had my 30-06 barrel mounted on when I first got it. If I had bought this receiver new, I would have sent it back to Thompson Center because the machining on it is not good. There are actually casting marks around the outside of that firing pin bushing that should have been machined away. The bushing is just about flush with the receiver, which is not normal after having looked at several different receivers. It should be actually protruding from the receiver, but I only had about 0.002 gap there. And so what happened when I would fire this, the top of this barrel would come back and slap that receiver, and it gave me a fit. So that's something to look out for if you have a really close barrel to frame gap. Let's talk factory ammunition first. A lot of people shoot factory ammo. Now, I know this would be a rare occurrence, but what if you didn't have any headspace with factory ammo? Well, first thing I would do is try a different manufacturer. If that didn't work, I would take the barrel to a gunsmith, have him take a finish reamer and take a few thousandths out of the chamber, or you could rent a reamer and do that yourself. The third option would be to take the firing pin bushing out, and it's held in by that little hex screw right behind your hammer, and take that to a machinist and have him mill a few thousandths off of it. Now, I don't think that's anything that you could do with a file, because you'll never keep that thing square, and that could create more problems than you already have. But again, I think no headspace with factory ammunition would be a rare occurrence. So what do you do with factory ammo if you have excessive headspace? Well, it's pretty simple to fix. You just shim this firing pin bushing to take up the difference. Now, Mike Bell and E. Arthur Brown both sell a little shim kit just for this purpose. Comes with different sizes of shims. So if you had 8 thousandths headspace, you put a 5 thousandths shim behind this bushing, you'll have 3 thousandths headspace. And that's how you correct it. Now I will say that I shoot 3 barrels on this receiver. 30-06 and the 270 take a 5 thousandths shim to get the headspace correct. I have a 223 barrel that requires 10 thousandths of shims to get the headspace correct. So that kind of shows you the difference there can be between barrels. So as a reloader, you can adjust your headspace by simply adjusting your sizing die. Now I'm not going to get real deep into that because again I'm going to do a complete video on reloading, but I still like to adjust my rifle to my cartridge instead of adjusting the cartridge to the rifle, if that makes any sense. What I do is set up my die so that there is some pressure. As you can hear, when the shell holder hits the end of the die, that is as short as you can make that cartridge. Then I adjust my headspace with the shims to match the cartridge, and I just seem to get better consistency that way. If you're shooting factory ammo, once you get your gun set up, you're pretty much finished. If you change ammunition lots or change brands, it might be smart to recheck your gun, make sure you still have some headspace. If you're a reloader, I recommend checking every cartridge. Now, some brass will spring back more than others. As I said earlier, when you load a bullet, you can lose some headspace with the case. Now, we're not going to measure every cartridge with a feeler gauge. It's kind of awkward to do, and you'll wear a gauge out pretty quickly. I suggest a case gauge. Now, I don't personally own a store-bought one. I made my own, and I may show you how to do that in my reloading segment. But I have used a L.E. Wilson gauge that I borrowed from a friend, and it will check the trim length of the cartridge, as well as have a min-max measurement on the case head end. I don't recommend using that to check your brass for the Encore. What I would do is use a caliper, put the case in the gauge and use a caliper to actually measure to the case head. Then write that measurement down. You'll be surprised to find that some brass may measure as much as 1/1.5 thousandths more or less when it comes out of the sizing die. So I guess that about does it, y'all. Hopefully I covered everything that I needed to concerning headspace and the Encore. If I missed something, just leave a question in the comments. I'll respond as soon as I can. Subscribe to my channel so you'll get notifications of my latest uploads. And again, thanks for watching.